also says that you can only eat four-legged land creatures that both chew the cud and have a cloven or a split hoof. Well, pigs don't chew the cud, therefore they are not kosher, so therefore pork products are not allowed. And I'm sure all of you are well aware of what constitutes a pork product. But I'm sure you haven't gone as far, for example, as Jell-O. Because you see, gelatin in many cases is made with pig's hooves. So therefore, unless the Jell-O is marked as kosher, it isn't considered kosher. So there are a lot of things that have these kinds of products in it that we're unaware of. And therefore, you can't eat them. Yeah?
What about genetically altered like vegetables and stuff like that?
I haven't checked into it. But genetically altered vegetables, you said? I don't know why they wouldn't. They're not.
Not if you know they are.
You know they are.
If you know they are, you can.
On what basis? I don't know, so
I'm not sure what the exact basis is.
Well, some of the organisms that they use to modify them are porcine. They're from
well, then it
cells.
wouldn't be. Yeah, I wasn't aware of the process. Okay. So at any rate, they can't eat that, and because it says you cannot eat a baby goat in its mother's milk, they say that you cannot mix meat and milk in the same meal. Therefore, at any meal that you have milk, you can't have any meat products and vice versa, which means that you have to have separate dishes, separate silverware, separate pots and pans, and in Israel, in the big hotels, you have to have separate kitchens. And these are kept very separate. You certainly wouldn't have, therefore, a cheeseburger, because that's mixing milk and meat. And there are a lot of times where there are ingredients in various prepared foods that you're unaware of. For example, one I just learned of the other day. Has anyone ever heard of an egg cream? Okay. What's in an egg cream? Huh?
Soda and eggs?
Soda. There's no eggs in it.
Chocolate syrup and salsa.
That's it, right? No milk. Wrong.
It's milk.
Ha! I found that out. There is the chocolate syrup that is usually used is called there's a name for it that all the Jews used and everybody in, huh? I was trying to remember. There's a special name, and there are certain publics, like in Vero Beach, where they have a lot of Jews from the East Coast, and they sell this particular, that's really the chocolate syrup you're supposed to use. I read the ingredients. In the chocolate syrup is non-fat milk powder. How about that? Who would have thought in syrup, in chocolate syrup, they add it all in. And therefore, in a way, there's definitely cream in it. And people have always said there's neither egg nor cream. That's wrong, because it's in the chocolate syrup. So you never know where people are going to put things.
Well, my cousin's temple back down on the East Coast is conservative, and I remember working at the preschool, and there was goldfish. Now, we were told we're not allowed to give the kids goldfish because actually goldfish are not kosher. Now, did you know that? Because I didn't know until I found out.
Since I myself don't keep kosher,
Well, no,
I
so.
am not as, into or aware of the, the unusual kinds of
See,
things.
'cause I didn't know, and I think I was explaining it's because it's cheese that they use. That's probably, it's made in I don't know.
In
The cheese.
addition,
Yeah, I don't know. Anything is possible.
Oh, the goldfish, the cracker.
What happens if you accidentally eat something non-kosher? How do you know?
Yeah.
Is there something
In other words, at a certain temperature, and the modern rabbis have determined what the temperature is and can turn it from meat to milk to milk to meat. So yeah, it can. That's one of the new provisions. And what's interesting about this is that you got new provisions. All the Torah says is, can't mix a kid in its mother's milk. It doesn't say you have to separate all meat and milk products. That there are certain animals that you cannot eat the meat from. And finally, because of Jacob wrestling with the angel in that story, where his thigh is pulled from the socket, you're not supposed to eat the hind quarter of the animal. That's all the Torah says. Everything else about not eating any other meat and milk products together, all of that was made up later by the rabbis. And that's why they have something that's called kosher and then glot kosher. And there's also something called biblical kosher. And biblical kosher is where you don't eat the forbidden foods and you don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, but you can mix meat and milk together. But the Orthodox don't accept regular kosher, or they don't accept biblical kosher. They only accept glot kosher. G-L-A-T-T. What's that? That means they take the lungs out of an animal that is being eaten, and before they use the meat, they blow up the lungs and put it in a pail of water to see if there are any bubbles. Because if there are bubbles coming out, it means there was a lesion in the lung. And if there's a lesion in the lung, it means the animal might have been unclean and cannot be eaten, even though it passes scrutiny on all the other levels. So, the Orthodox, as I said before, say that you have to keep kosher, and you cannot challenge it, and you cannot change it. Now, the Reformed Jews came along in the 1800s, and they said, the person, the authority behind the law is not God, unless we're talking about the moral law. In the moral law, Reformed Jews say, the authority behind the law is God, and man can't question it or change it. But if it's ritual law, you are the authority behind the law. You yourself. So all of these differences, and I'm going to apply it in a second to the conservative Jew, all of these differences are about the authority behind the law. And that's what I wanted to explain with regard to all of these different types of Jews. Reformed Jews therefore say, because ritual law is the product of any particular age in which people live, human beings can change it so that we can preserve the meaning of the law. For example, it makes no sense to walk up 25 flights of stairs instead of pushing a button in an elevator simply because there's a spark in the light circuit. If the idea is not to work on Shabbat, then you're much better off riding the elevator. And for the Reformed Jew, the letter of the law is not as important as the spirit of the law, if everybody understands where I'm going here. Now, in between those are conservative Jews, and they came as a response to Reformed Jews because they felt Orthodox were too staid and rigid, but that Reformed Jews had gone too far, because if you yourself are the arbiter of whether or not you should follow a law, it's too easy for those individual Jews to say, to heck with it, I'm not going to do it. So, the conservatives said, God is the authority behind the law, but maybe we don't understand the law fully as it has been given to us through the generations. Maybe we need to look at historical Judaism. How has it been practiced? And does the practice of it still make sense today? For example, not driving your car on Shabbat. The law about lighting fires in your habitations was given, as we know, thousands of years ago, before automobiles were ever anticipated. Automobiles have led to urban spread. In ancient times and in really through the 1800s, you lived in if you were a Jew, you lived in a small village near your synagogue. There was no concept of getting in your car and, driving there. On top of it, there was your horse if you needed it. If it was a little bit further, they made sure to make the Eruv, they made sure to make the Shabbat limit far enough that you could ride your horse. Is it cold in here? No. They're freezing back there. Let me make it just a tiny bit warmer. And when I get cold, we're in trouble because I pushed it up just a smidge, and then we'll see from there. So the conservative rabbi said, Jews have always historically been able to get to their place of worship very easily. And therefore to say that you can't drive your car in the 20th and 21st century when you live miles and miles from the synagogue makes no sense. So the conservative have a different authority behind the law. They've set up a law committee of learned rabbis who know the traditional law but aren't afraid to look at and live in a modern world. And they say, as long as it was never intended that the laws of Shabbat should keep you from going to the synagogue and pray, we must have misunderstood that law at its inception. And therefore, this Board of Rabbis says, you are allowed to drive your car on the Shabbat as long as it is only to go to the synagogue and pray and come back home. Plus, in order to tip your hat, so to speak, to do homage to the tradition, you must park your car a few blocks away from the synagogue and symbolically walk to the synagogue, pray, symbolically walk back to your car, and then drive home. So that's their compromise. As a result of these three, people often say the Orthodox, because of their rigidity, are crazy. The Reform, because we're so loosey-goosey, are lazy. And because the conservatives don't know what they believe, halfway between one and the other are hazy. Lazy, crazy, and hazy. Now, there's also what we call Reconstructionist Judaism. That has nothing to do with the law or the authority behind it. The Reconstructionist Jews believe that much of what we understand in religion today is different by way of explanation than the way we understood it thousands of years ago. Today we've been informed by science. We've been informed by the social sciences, by the physical sciences. We are able to answer questions that before were left to God and miracles. Therefore, they take all the miracles out of the prayer book. And they take miracles out of the holidays. And they give them modern psychological, economic, sociological explanations instead. And therefore, by way of law and practice, they are generally conservative Jews, but stripped of the miracles, theologically speaking. So, once again, we see here what we've got is a huge array of different ways of being Jewish. And there are different concepts even within these. And what has kept us alive, I think, through all these different changing situations is the simple fact that we've been able to be very open, broad-minded, questioning, malleable, and adaptive. And I think as long as we continue to do that, we will continue to grow. Any questions then on this final thing of Gesundheit, of Jewish law? Yes?
Do people change very often from one to another?
Not very often, but they do change. One thing I can say, and I'm a Reform Jew, and that is I don't know anybody that follows the law without a human filter. I think anybody who says they hear it directly from God and somehow the Rebbe knows what God wants and should be trusted to give the description and explanation, I think are putting themselves in a sort of cultic situation. I think it's